Good afternoon, Mr. Paul. How you doing?
Good, man. Good to see
Uh,
you.
Thank you
I'm
so
good.
much for taking the time. I know you actually had an incredibly busy week. Last week, you were doing a job as a commercial director remotely. So the production was in Vancouver, and you were here. Uh, that
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It was actually, yeah, all the prep when I wasn't getting back to you on text or emails and all that stuff. It was because it was a lot of preparing for it. And um, that was all last week. And then, yeah, we actually shot yesterday. So it was me. And then we had there's a co-director I was doing it with on the ground in Vancouver, this guy, Dylan, who's amazing. And yeah, I had this whole experience because Vancouver has opened up now again to limited scale shooting. There was only about 5 people on set, and it was a real family, a mom and 2 kids, kind of cast like all together. So yeah, that was an experience. Like I was patched in kind of over not Zoom, but something close to that. I think it's called WebEx or something like that, and saw the camera feed, and yeah, it was different, but it all worked, and it was actually fun at the end of the day.
Forgot to turn my mic back on. That's never happened before. I'm just trying to cut out the lawnmower in the back. Um,
No problem.
and I wonder too if this is sort of like even when everybody goes back to normal and everything is kind of reset to what we were more used to. Do you think that these mobile directing, shooting things will also happen more just because of different other factors? People have gotten used to it. It saves on flight time. Was there any advantage to doing it that way that you saw?
I can see. I mean, I hope for any creatives involved, it doesn't, because it was like I definitely found points of sort of just wanting to really be there, and that's part of the joy of it is like working with everybody around you and as a team, and like, and I also feel like you get cut off from a certain sort of like empathy and social cues that are just in the room when you're feeling the real chemistry, with people, and you're kind of like on a delay, like talking through this like little screen, and someone's running around with a laptop and then sounds cutting out and all that stuff. I think there is potentially an opportunity that, certain clients or agencies have experienced this, that for some stuff that might be remote, they might, after having experienced this, be comfortable with patching in rather than flying to something. If it was on location somewhere, say very far in Northern Ontario, it's like, okay, could we save the cost of, putting up 6 extra people to do this potentially if we can check in and get all of our approvals like over Zoom and watch the whole shoot from the comfort of the office or just with a team like that. I could definitely like I mean I don't know usually what their standards are for certain things, but I can see that being a reality because I feel like the technology is there to allow people to kind of access it in that way. So, but we'll see though. I don't know. I really like being on set. I really part of the joy of all this for me is, as I said, just working with people. So, um, yeah, I hope to be able to be around people
Don't we all?
again soon.
Well, listen, I really want to get
Yeah.
started with this conversation. I just want to give our audience a sense of, why I asked you to be on and sort of what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about a lot of things, but, this idea that uh, when we're coming up and we're creating a project or we're getting involved in a project, there are so many decisions that have to be made. Whether it's a personal project or a commercial project, prep in itself is this sort of nightmare activity where you just have so many boxes to check. And the conversation that you and I had offline early on was about how some projects, I'm just going to go in with a camera and nothing else. Like I don't need all these lights. I don't need all this grip, right? And then other projects, that you're going to need it to, translate the idea that you're trying to get to the audience. And so knowing when to like build it up and knowing when to strip it down. And I think that's really useful because as filmmakers, the tendency is to think that we're always going to need a package truck. We're always going to need, background actors, or we're always going to need something, whatever you want to name it. And really, to understand your storyline, understand your concept, really is going to drive, this notion of when to build up your supplies and when to keep it sort of stripped down.
Hmm.
And why I think you're one of the great authorities of that is because I think that two reasons. One is your work shows a very divided or very polarized look at that. You have stuff that is super stripped down that looks super gorgeous, and you have stuff that has a lot of production value that also looks super gorgeous. So it's clear as an artist, you have the capacity to make something look and to tell a story in an engaging way, regardless of what your resources are. And I think that that's a very important lesson for emerging filmmakers to understand. And so we have a number of your projects today that we're going to look at as sort of case studies, and a couple that have really blown me away. And, you know, like the Salonier for me was just incredible. And that's one of the ones that why I chose to reach out to you. But I mean, all your work is incredible. Multiple Vimeo staff picks, featured on Nowness, Creator Class. So you've definitely earned your stripes. So that's as much talking as I'm going to do. Why don't you give the audience who's tuning in, why don't you give them a sense of sort of where you came from, how you entered into the film industry, and how you came to be where you are as a director today?
Okay, cool. And yeah, thanks for saying such sweet things. I'm glad you see the hyper budget work just as engaging as the stuff that has some money behind it. But yeah, no, I think, you know, to tie it back to that and talking about like where I came from and all this is that, like, you know, in terms of talking about gear and how much you need to make something, I mean, all the first stuff I made, and, you know, and I made with a collaborator I started out with, my friend Adam, it's like, we didn't have any money to do anything. And I think it was like either, you know, shooting on very strict. There used to be a Much Fat grant that was like maybe $3,000 or something like that. And then even before that, it was just like being able to borrow gear from people and stuff like that. And I don't know, like I never had the luxury of like having access to tons of gear or getting grants that allowed tons of gear. And then, but anyways, to give the jumping off point, I began in this sort of industry and as actually an actor. I went to theater school and then started acting in TV shows and films and a lot of like character roles and, you know, guys that sort of get kidnapped and duct tape and rescued by the cops, and then the duct tape gets ripped off and I say they went that way. And then I did some more substantial roles in some TV shows and stuff like that. But along the way, like in between gigs, I started to get curious about just being able to make my own stories. And me and my friend Adam at the time just started making some music videos together, experimenting, stuff like that. And then that just sort of led to, I mean, and it wasn't immediate in any way. Like there's definitely some stuff we made that went absolutely nowhere and some stuff that never saw the light of day, but slowly it just gave us a few opportunities to get into, you know, chances to make stuff with a little bit more of a distribution plan behind it or a little bit more of a financial support around it. But there was never this like large leap where suddenly, you know, I went from like a project that was entirely self-funded or just like a $3,000 budget to suddenly $300,000 or whatever. And in terms of like any narrative or like true doc stuff I've done, it's all been pretty low budget. The higher budget stuff has definitely come from the commercial side itself. But yeah, and I think honestly, it's like just because we never had like a ton of stuff to work with, it's kind of always just building off of that idea that, like, I mean, essentially to tell a story in this medium, you need something in front of the camera and someone behind the camera and a camera, and then I think you just kind of figure out what you need after that. But then also because there was no fancy VFX or tons of incredibly produced or set design or like compositions that we could achieve or anything like that, it was like, all right, how can we, a lot of the focus went into like actually trying to tell an engaging story in front of the camera, finding a great location, getting a great cast that people want to spend 30 seconds to 11 minutes with, and finding a story that, I don't know, that like really resonated with me and that, you know, we wanted to capture. And I think to do that, it's like, yes, you need some level of technical apparatus behind you so that it is actually enjoyable to watch and enjoyable to listen to. Sound is always overlooked, I think, and it's so incredibly important. And I don't think sound people get enough praise because it's you know, without them, our movies would just be horrible to experience. But yeah, and I think it was just, so the focus for me has always been on like, I guess, yeah, characters you want to spend time with that are engaging, and figuring out how to tell a story with them with whatever resources we had. And then I think and I think a lot of this is subjective too. It's like we might, you said some really nice things about my work and the look of it, but some other people might be like, oh, that's awfully dark, or it's like I can't see anything, or it's like, oh, just daylight. It's like not all of it looks like super polished, which I don't mind. Like a lot of like cinema and stuff I like is just lit with natural daylight, or has a natural daylight look to it, or isn't hyper produced images in a way. And obviously not everything that I like is just that, but that's a look that I like and I'm attracted to, and just have found easy to embrace on a low budget. And then I think, what we talked about offline, like on the phone before this, was that doing a lot of documentary work, there's also just a massive benefit to not having a large crew and not running around with a lot of stuff that takes time to set up. And I think there's a lot of importance, in doc, and I think in narrative too, when you're doing stuff that's a bit more intimate. It may sound incredibly obvious, but the smaller scale crew that you have, the less time you need to fiddle with stuff, the more you're going to be able to like spend time actually getting a story in front of the camera and spend time with people and build up a comfort level and all that.
So when I look at your work though, here's the thing that I get that every artist is critical of themselves, and we're good at what we're good at, and sometimes we look at other people's work and like, oh, I wish I could do that, without really acknowledging our own skill set and what we bring to the world from our art point of view. But when we talk about this idea of like doc, for example, like doc is always stripped down, doc is always run and gun, and that's true, but I see so many clear examples of people that have the same resources as you. And this is not to like be negative on anybody else's work, because everyone's trying really hard with what they know. But one of the challenges that most people face is that they'll take a camera and a director and a whatever sound guy into a room, and it just doesn't look or move as good as some of your stuff does. And when I see your stuff, number one is, you can tell me if I'm right or wrong here, but you've chosen really engaging characters. I think I've said this on the show before, which is I had a producer say to me once, you want characters that you can't look away from. And this was someone who did a lot of doc, but also reality TV. It's like either the person is really extraordinary or they're just honey boo boo. They're just, you can't look away. You're like, look at this disaster. So I think you've chosen characters who, for one reason or another, are just so engaging. We don't really care how sculpted the image is necessarily, because we're so focused on what this person is doing or saying. So that's one thing. The other thing that I see is that your shots that you chose are very intelligently chosen. So you're not like, well, I guess we're just going to shoot this person in the living room, and you plunk them down and you're like, the wall is gross and white and the overhead lighting on them. Like, you make a point to like shoot interviews in a very traditionally cinematic way without using all these resources. Using natural light, and just the mise en scène that you create as a director shows a level of severe forethought into that. So to me, it's these two things. One is your planning process and your cinematographic, if we can say that's not even really a word, approach, and what you know there to be a method of transmitting an idea. And the other thing is choosing your characters. So what's your opinion of my assessment?
It sounds like the, if we're going to keep going with this word, which may exist or not, like cinematographic approach, it's like, maybe it is a word. Aesthetics matter to me in terms of like how we shoot and capture something. And there's certain looks that I like and want to craft stuff that looks like that, and it's influenced, of course, by people I've worked with or people or other filmmakers whose work I like, and it definitely like leans more into the cinematic or side of things, which is traditionally sort of associated with narrative work over doc work. But there is like great examples from like over the years of different stuff that is, doc work that feels very cinematic, like films like Streetwise, which you can look up on YouTube and is absolutely wonderful, like Paris is Burning, that feels very cinematic as well. I think I think, when I'm going into it though too, like if we want to talk about The Last Saulnier, it was like a case study. It was like looking at who this man Bruce was a very complex character who, lives a little bit of a solitary life on this farm out in the countryside, surrounded by all this art that he's collected over the years. He supports so many like young Canadian artists and helps, I guess, build up the profile of artists on the international stage. And he hosts big fundraisers up at his farm. But there's so much depth to him as a person. And I think for a lot of people, a lot of mystery. And so when I'd seen some photos of the farmhouse and had sat down with him in person, and he's one of those people that you sit down with in person and you just like, it feels like he stepped out of a film or stepped out of a time portal from a different area. Like there's just so much depth to his character. He's so instantly entertaining. He's so witty. He's a storyteller that like within 10 minutes, you've covered 9 different subjects. You can't even quite recall what you guys were talking about at first, like very leaping around through all this different stuff. He has a very rich history and life, like in his own experience. And so I started looking and thinking about films that had, that were sort of portraits of sort of like complex male individuals and ones that definitely were a little bit more like isolated from the world in a way and were incredibly passionate about something. So, I mean, I did a treatment for this project that I can share and we can take it through. And I mean, you can see like these are after meeting Bruce and some photos of the farm, it's still some visuals that I ended up just sort of pulling as I built up like how we would tell the story and like the visual language I wanted to kind of employ. So, I mean, can you see this right now? Is that up on the screen? Okay, this is from a really obscure filmmaker called Paul Thomas Anderson, who made this really fairly known film called The Master, featuring this Philip Seymour Hoffman, R.I.P. But while I wouldn't say the character in this was a direct comparison to Bruce, just the way he shot Philip Seymour Hoffman and also Joaquin Phoenix's character in this, which is a lot of great sort of frames within frames, which is an aesthetic I always like, and I think it always works well for sort of more documentaries that feel like portraits of people. It definitely served as a very large inspiration for this. So I can just start flipping. What I could do actually is I could start flipping through the images and pages from this, and I can show you some stills from the actual project, and you can see there just how much I ripped off the visual style for this. But it also, I think, informed a lot of how we shot it. Was we did shoot it on a lot of, to get into the technical side, did shoot it on basically a single lens for I'd say 90% of it, and that was a 24 millimeter lens. And I also like that for these more intimate doc style projects, because we're not bothering with flipping lenses, and it's more about getting in close with the camera. I really like the very wide lens in close look for stuff like this. Also lets you move back and feel the whole space. And I also like that it doesn't isolate the character too much from the space themselves. Like Bruce's farm itself is, and the walls of it and the artwork on the walls and the whole place tells as much of a story about him himself as he is speaking on camera. As you see, like, it is filled with all this beautiful artwork, but you can get a sense that there's a mess and a chaos in the way the house is kept together. And I think all those details, if you go in anything of a longer lens, you can start to miss out on this stuff. And I always wanted the environment and him to feel completely connected and not to separate that. So, I mean, this is the usual sort of, I don't know, treatment jargon. I wish I could be more original in how I titled stuff, but it just does not come to me. And then, of course, there was references to Phantom Thread here as well, and which is also like another film about a very complex man and is quite isolated. And I wanted to bring the audience into the film with getting a sense of who Bruce was right away. And so we wanted to build out this morning routine or this montage where we leapt around. So it felt like very much like what it would feel like to hang out with Bruce for 10 minutes, because it's very immediate, the sort of impression he gives you. But again, it's I mean, just because I love putting characters by windows, that's an aesthetic thing. But I also feel like it can create images that are quite strong, and then just give us the lighting that we need. And then I also leaned into a lot of stuff just with natural lighting. Of course, this is a pretty obvious example of one of the greatest examples of just using it with like Barry Lyndon as well. But this sort of like Bruce's own style and his dress is very much like he just stepped out of like Edwardian England and has this trunk that's like garments from all over the world from that era. Like it does, he feels timeless, and so from a specific time, but yet so timeless, like all at once, which is, I'm just contradicting myself in that statement, but like there's something that just feels like he stepped out of a slightly different world in his dress and in his style and his room. There's something that feels sort of Baroque about the room itself, in his house, and the design to it. So this felt very appropriate, and also the color tones as well in all of this.
And I got a quick question, kind of before you move on here too, which is that in the film, he wears many different outfits. Like obviously it was shot over the course of several days, as one would change their outfit constantly over that time period anyways, but it all felt very intentional in terms of what he was wearing. Is that just my impression, or was there some hand?
That is, no, that was, no, that's, what he wore throughout it was completely at his discretion, and we would stop shooting because he felt like having an outfit change, just at certain points. He probably, I mean, we just had a lot of fun, and I think he changed outfits maybe 30 times over the 3 days. He is, there was just, and then there was a sequence where we shot him getting dressed in multiple different outfits, because it's just, I think, defines who he is so much, the way he expresses himself through his clothing and these very unique items. But there was a lot, I mean, sometimes we would wait an hour or so for him to decide on the outfit, that's part of who he is. And so we had the liberty of time to sort of do that with him, which was nice. And so all the costume and the different costume changes worked out very, conveniently for the film itself, but there was no sort of direction on my hand behind it. Like I just wanted him to like be himself on camera, and that's really just part of who he is. And then, okay, so maybe, everybody's seen enough of these stills, I think, and then I can hold up, if I'm doing this right. Okay, so here's some actual stills from the project itself. Okay, here's Bruce in the bath. That came from, I just asked him what his morning routine was, and he said he takes a bath every morning. So I said, why don't we film you in the bath? And as you can see, it's just lit, by the window out there. And this is all around the property on his farm. As you can see, this is one outfit that pops up through it. But just, I'll just go through these quickly, and people should get a sense, like seeing, what I'd envisioned, at least when doing the treatment before, what we actually achieved on the day itself. Again, like living, mirrors and frames within frames is a big aesthetic that I like to employ when doing portrait stuff, or documentaries that are supposed to feel like kind of moving portraits of people. This is him getting dressed. We're framing him through the door. Very much just from that Phantom Thread film. Nothing original here. But it all fits him in his world, and I think that's what's important when like leaning into references. It shouldn't just feel like you're trying to remake something nice that you've seen. It should still feel honest to this character that you're capturing in their own world. And I just sort of had the benefit of having a character that I felt shared certain qualities in terms of who they are as a person, and the sort of complex world that they live in with the character itself. And he also just had an incredible location. Like if this had been shot in an apartment in Toronto, it never would have turned out looking like this. So it's meeting the person and seeing the location kind of first and getting an idea of it, and then building off of that how we inform it. Like I couldn't have imposed this look on a location that didn't look like this, essentially. And that is the same photo.
And question, just looking at these stills, it makes me think, what was involved in terms of your scouting process? Did you and the cinematographer go and take stills ahead of time and like treat them a bit to see if they can match the aesthetic that you wanted, or?
No, No. Bruce just walked around the house filming it on his cell phone, and then we just looked at it. There wasn't any physical scouting in advance. On the day of, cinematographer on this is actually my buddy Adam, who's a great director as well himself. We just took like 40 minutes to walk. Bruce was like making breakfast, so we just took 40 minutes to kind of walk around and kind of look at the property and stuff like that. But having shot a lot of stuff with just natural light before and getting a sense of it, it's like how to work in this space was just
Right.
came pretty quickly. But yeah, there was no real color treatments or anything in advance. The color grade on this actually was done by a man named Andrew Exworth. He's at the Vanity, and he did a wonderful grade on this after I sent him some images. So one of the many reasons of other people's efforts of why this looks so good is due to him. And that's from another project. Clearly, I'm very good at organizing this stuff. And that's from something else.
And
okay.
people, before we should move on as well to the Joy. But before we do, people might want to know too, I know we get a lot of questions about gear. Can you tell us a little bit about what camera and lens that you used to shoot that one?
I used, that was a Canon C300 Mark II, I guess. And then it was one of the Canon, it would be the 24 millimeter Cinema Prime or Cinelens. And that's it. There was nothing else. I think, we did have a zoom on us that we used in a couple of moments. And I think it was one of the Canon Cinema Zooms. But yeah, it was just that.
Beautiful. Okay, we're going to move into the Joy, and we actually have a couple questions from the chat, and that's why I want to move into the Joy, because I want to answer one of our first questions. And this is from Matt Barkley. Matt asks, what kind of insight can you give about the process of shooting a doc-style piece like the Joy on film as opposed to digital?
Yeah. So, hey, Matt, what's up? Matt's a wonderful cinematographer, and we're going to talk about some work with Matt actually later on. But the Joy, shooting a doc-style music video on film, it sounds a little bit like a kind of insane approach, I guess, in terms of when people think about cost and everything like that. But one thing I'd like to say is I actually did it. One of the main reasons I did it on film was actually for cost reasons. Because, I mean, aesthetically, I knew I wanted to, I talked to the artist about it and shown some other stuff that I really liked that was in the same vein or tone as the Joy, which was capturing, I think, just a very visceral feeling experience with like youth and kids and like their experience. And I like the rawness of the feel. From a technical standpoint, I feel like with Super 16 especially, you can walk into a room, you may not have the most ideal lighting circumstances. There was no lighting in that except for some places that naturally had some kind of neons or LCD. Although I think we did bring around a light mat with us that we used like once or twice. Very, very basic stuff, but all the daytime stuff was just all daylight or like, I guess, practical stuff. But it was like, I just feel like if we had shot that on digital, it would have been like, oh, this lighting doesn't look ideal. But shooting on film, Super 16 just has a look, baked into it. There's this stylized look to it that you just get off of the grain and the way it renders colors, and especially 500T, which has a bit more grain and has this sort of like little bit of a blue cast to it. It just made sense that if I need to go around with this again was shot with like two different cinematographers, just because we shot it like in two different seasons, and the original cinematographer was away shooting a feature because he's a great, talented cinematographer named Diego. But it was just me, cinematographer, AC, and producer Sia, who's wonderful. I work with a lot, and we just ran around. And I just knew we needed to keep it small. I didn't want to run around with all the things that we needed to sort of operate a digital camera with, but still, and then wanted to avoid spaces feeling too raw or too bleak. I think if we were shooting digitally, they would have looked that way, but on film, it just brought some innate beauty into it. To get back to Matt's question, so it was partially that, and then also in terms of cost, like you can get the Aton XTR from Lyft for very, very cheap for a weekend. You can rent it for like $100, and then I think for the lenses, we got a great deal from Ontario Camera using their Zeiss Ultra Primes for Super 16. And again, it was just we only used 2 lenses the entire time. Although the camera does come with this Zeiss zoom from Lyft, which we used once or twice, but it was just because it just comes with it. You rent it. So it was cost effective for me because I knew we weren't shooting this compacted into 2 weekends, like 2 days over a weekend. So if I was to go and try and rent like a proper like an Alexa that I wanted to shoot this on like otherwise, or traditionally might shoot it on otherwise, that's going to be a high cost that I have to go back and rent it each time spread out over a couple of days, like over a month. And then like 2 months later, going and picking up that camera each time was not expensive. And, once you buy the film, you got the film and you just reload and everything like that. So it was very cost effective through that kind of process. We did get some money from Factor, but I paid for the majority of the video. It was a real passion project myself. So that I don't know, it just created a couple of different reasons went into the decision. And then once we were shooting on film, that informed a lot of the creative and how we were shooting it as well. That's a very long-winded answer to your question, Matt. But that was, in terms of aesthetic choice, that's a little touching on a little bit there for each one. So it's like aesthetics of film, and then
right. And I think that's why, everyone's going after this film look, whether it's film emulation or whatnot, is that especially with Super 16, not so much with Super 30 or with 35, but with Super 16, because you have that grain, you have that lower resolution, it imparts an aesthetic that is still very, very difficult to match digitally. And so we have a growing number of artists, same sort of similar artists who may have shot digital photography and now are getting into film photography as well and falling in love with that. And so there's a growing number of people who are interested in shooting film who may not have shot with film before. In terms of making sure that you don't go through, 20,000 reels, what is your advice in terms of planning out the story and your shots when shooting on film, and you have to be a little bit more conscious of how much film goes through the gate?
Yeah, I think work with highly skilled, very experienced cinematographers who work with film a lot. That's what I would say to another director. Make sure, if it's your first one and you're paying for all the film, make sure it's in the hands of somebody that's going to be very, very responsible with it and accountable to it and for you. And that's what I had with both Diego and then also with Peter Hadfield, who shot the second part of the job. I would say, it's like Diego was able to give me a ratio of like how many minutes we probably had for each person. It was great too. I also for a lot of this, I didn't have a monitor to actually see what we were shooting. There's a lot of checking in, like looking through the actual camera's like physical viewfinder, and then like just knowing that because we were living on I guess like an 8mm lens for a lot of it, which I think is 16 on, would transfer to about 16 or 9 would transfer to about 16 on proper like full frame or 35. Just knowing what that would look like and be able to run around with it. But it's a lot of trust in your cinematographer. But I trusted both these guys. I know they're both like a lot more talented than I would be in terms of directing visuals. And I think it was knowing how much time we had. And then it also taught me to be like, if we were shooting digital, I probably would have overshot so much stuff. So it forces you to make so many more decisions in advance, come in a lot more prepared, not just rolling stuff because like, oh, something might happen here. It's like move with intention. And it helped me too. It freed me up. I did have a monitor for some parts of it. For a lot of it, though, I would just then be looking at the subjects and really interacting with them, especially with the guys dancing and stuff like that, where, I could see what was happening, offer direction, and see in the space what we could move to next. Where typically, like sometimes, if we're working in digital, I'll just have like my hunchback down over like a monitor the whole time, be like scratching my chin and then start nitpicking stuff in the frame that like for a story like this, it doesn't matter at all. So I think in terms of shooting on film, yeah, it's just like it's tons of preparation. Make sure you know what you're doing and make sure that like what you're, ask yourself when you've got an idea for something like, is this boring? Is this boring? Because like every second you're burning on it is money. So make sure it's worth committing to in that way.
Awesome.
So, yeah.
Let's go through. I know that I saw that you have some stills there, so I'm going to make you show some of them and just talk through a little bit of this project.
Yes, I do. They ended up in a different folder. Here we go. Okay, cool. Yeah. So this is one of my favorite things I've done in a long time, or maybe ever. So Josh McIntyre records under Prince Josh. He's also part of a band called Prince Innocent. Is an amazing artist and just all around, like, I don't know, just he's one of the greatest things about Toronto. He's just such a good guy, and he's been in the music community here for like many, many years. And I DJ'd for years, and we would see each other at parties or, you know, music circles, crossover, whatever. We just always see each other around and became like friends kind of through that. And there's this sense for me that like since directing, I've started to take more seriously in the past, like I guess like 3-4 years, I started to step away from DJing and music that I was involved with before. And there is sort of this thing of like, oh, it'd be nice to do something that spoke to that world, or was, I don't know, like, spoke to the experiences that I'd had, or I just wanted to capture the feeling of that world in a way. I wasn't quite sure how to go about it. Then Josh sent me this song, and it was called The Joy. And essentially I was like, this is it. I was like, let's film something that's celebrating the joy of why we do this, why people go out and dance until 4 a.m. and out of the way places in the city. And I think it's something that in my mind, I was like, I'd always had a hard time expressing exactly what I liked about it to people without kind of falling into, like, you know, the usual cliches. And I was like, you know, I want to get a bunch of people from sort of diverse set of backgrounds, experiences, different generations and age groups at different levels of, you know, involvement in it, whether it's like a dancer or somebody who tours the world internationally as DJ, and try and find that common thread by just simply kind of asking them, what is the joy to them? And so we casted people that we knew, like through our friends, or like friends we had just like in the scene itself, or some kids that Josh had been working with. And just started, like, I always do, like with this or with any doc project, I always like to do like a pre-interview where we just kind of feel out the chemistry and do like an interview beforehand. And we sat down and chatted it out and came up with like an idea of like how we could capture them, you know, for a few minutes. Some people we had a full day with, some people I had 45 minutes with, you know what I mean? And and it's just all about people. I just wanted an honest portrayal of people talking about what the joy is to them. And then the other side of it was, I think this world of like raving or underground dance music or going out and feeling free as a kid somewhere in this like suffocating city, which it can be sometimes for people, it can often be captured in a really sort of like stylized or kind of like overtly stylized or sensationalized way. And I wanted something that felt, you know, a bit more raw, honest, and kind of like grounded in reality, and just like people talking from the heart. And this is what it is. And I think, you know, it's, some people might, you know, it might look raw and awful to some people, or some people might find it maybe beautiful. So who knows? But wanting to get people speaking from the heart in a meaningful way about what this means to them.
Before we go through these stills, one of the things that I've heard often, you know, with different filmmakers talking, is that when you're starting out as a filmmaker, really you should be shooting what you know. So you have a connection to the world in some way, whether you are a musician or a mathematician, or you grew up in the mountains, or whatever your situation is, and to shoot what you know first, because that's the thing you know the most about. And when I see your work, there's an aesthetic style that carries through the projects, whether it's low budget or high budget. And, you know, you talk about, you know, you were an actor, but also a DJ. So can you quickly talk about your influences and sort of what, you know, Paul brings into the filmmaking, and his choice of characters, his choice of stories? What attracts you?
It makes me sound like I've never really had a focus in my life too. And it's like actor, DJ, and I'm directing. I don't know. It's just general curiosity, stuff that, like, you know, when I was talking to Tish, who's like this wonderful person, wonderful DJ, who's like in The Joy as well. She was talking about, like, she can, you know, there's something about sometimes when you play a song and it just hits you in a certain way, like in your heart, and you know that there's something there. That's just it. There's that something about that, you know, when she knows that when she plays it out, she's going to get that reaction out of the crowd, or people are going to feel it too. And it's very hard to express what that is. And I think with a lot of whether it's aesthetic, filming aesthetics, or it's a subject matter, I want to approach, or stories I want to tell. It's just it's an extension of that, or it's the music I used to DJ, or it's what I love to do in acting and improv and stuff. It's just something that feels right. It's something that excites me. I don't think there's, I mean, maybe years from now I'll be able to like intellectualize it and really like break it down or whatever, but it's mostly based on like a feeling of like what I find interesting and engaging. And then I think, the gamble is that hopefully other people watch it and find it engaging and interesting as well. Like, I sometimes think about this of like, okay, there's like this like stress test maybe or something. It's like, if I show it to my parents, are they going to get this? Is it going to make sense to them? Or are they going to be like, like, why do you keep making all this weird stuff? And I thought about it one time because it's like, we were showing a film to my dad and he was like, yeah, it was kind of like interesting. It wasn't quite like what I was picturing when you described it. And I was kind of like bummed. It was like, oh, it sucks that he didn't get it. And like, a friend of mine was like, it's good that he didn't get it and that he thought it was weird and like, pushed him in a bit of a way. Cause it's like, if you played it safe and done something for another generation or whatever to understand, you probably wouldn't have been happy with what you did. And then there's some other films I've done that I've like shown my parents, like The Last Saunier, that they completely get and completely engage with, which is totally fine. And it's like, and I realized it's like, I can't, it sounds so obvious, but you can't try and make something to appease everybody. You're going to kill yourself doing that creatively. And I think for me, it's just been like, okay, like, yeah, rolling the dice on like what I like or what what feels strongly and gives me a strong reaction. And then it's hoping that other people react to it too. And I can't really describe it any other way than that. And it's like hoping that, my instincts are right and that, there's something in the work that people respond to as well, rather than some strategy to, garner some kind of mass appeal right. Or, open some doors for myself. Yeah. It's just stuff
Take
that
us
I
through
like.
some of these stills.
Cool. All right. So this is Warren, artist. He goes under the name artist Geist, who was one of our featured players in The Joy. And him and his friend Tristan, we thought filmed them for one day and then another day with Warren. But he is a incredibly eloquent speaker, a guy who, when I recorded all the interviews myself, off of like when we weren't shooting with just like a little Zoom recorder, I like rented from Long and McQuaid. And just really had a conversation with him. And when he started talking about it, he's in his early 20s, and the way he talked about it with all this maturity just like really struck me. And he has a very poetic way to him. He makes some incredible music himself. He's an incredible performer. And I feel very lucky to have met him and to now call him my friend. I hope he feels the same way, Warren, if you watch this. This is an artist called Jacques Green, and we went into his house, and I thought it was nice to show the contrast of somebody, he's a fantastic artist. I first met in Montreal when I was living back there. We stayed in touch over the years, and very, very generous artist and very talented musician. And I thought it was nice to, with a lot of this, I wanted the intimacy of being in these people's homes. And most of this video, even though it's about, if you want to call it the club or rave or whatever, 90% of this video just takes place actually in people's houses. And away from them. And I wanted this detachment that it wasn't actually, we see flashes of party and stuff like that, but I like seeing these people in the in-between moments. Everybody has a context for them, just like, in the darkness, like under laser lights in a DJ booth, but what's it like outside of there when you get to step back and reflect this? And I think it just rounded them off a bit as people and as characters. So I felt very lucky that people just let me show up at their house with a camera and two people. This is some nice blurry club footage. So yeah, most of it was shot on 16. A lot of this stuff in actual like parties. This is a party we were actually DJing at Halloween last year. But we shot on an old Canon, I wonder if it's around here, mini DV camera. And I really I know mixed media is, it's a lot of fun. But I felt like in the past couple of years it became pretty strong sort of like aesthetic that was being just used for aesthetic sake, and really calling a lot of attention to itself. So I didn't want this to feel like overtly like we were going back and forth between mixed media in an overly stylistic way. The choice to do the mini DV camera, like in all these situations, is that another part of this for me too was I never wanted to intrude on these environments and these parties in a way that made anybody there feel uncomfortable or feel like they were being watched. This is a place a lot of people go to just like feel a bit freer and like be themselves. If I came in with like 3 people running around camera trying to stage things or get little moments, I think it just would have completely intruded on all of it. And it was just this small little camera that nobody was bothered by and felt like I was just there, like shooting some party footage or whatever. And it was very, very discreet. A lot of it shot was like a low angle. And everybody was cool with it. Like I always talk to the organizers or DJs or people at the party themselves, and like nobody was intimidated by this little thing. And at the same time, the grain you get on this tape when you're shooting in low light just felt like it matched the aesthetic of everything else. And I also did some like Diego, one of the cinematographers, just recommended that I do some kind of like off-speed shutter stuff to get some like dragging, blurring lines and stuff, which look cool and helped with some cuts. And a lot of these shots were supposed to like take people suddenly like banging like into a scene like this, but we're also supposed to feel like textural in a way visually. And so yeah, I shot all that stuff myself on a whole bunch of late nights, just running out to try and catch different things as it's happening. So it doesn't work well as a still. I'm looking right now.
I think it looks
like,
awesome. You kidding me? That's amazing.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, it's good. But in motion, it's awesome, and I absolutely love it. This is Warren. We went out with Warren one night and had him dance. He's also like an absolutely fantastic dancer, and really steals the show in his scenes in this film. This is Rob, one of the DJs. This is I think at the new Mocha, like up on Sterling. There's a Halloween thing there. And again, with like the blurred shutter to get all these like kind of effects. This is Kareem, and Kareem's an incredible DJ, and Tish as well. They're great friends, also good friends with Josh. And we got to spend a great night with them, getting a sense of building this world of like what it's like just hanging out with friends. Maybe it's before a party, maybe it's after the party, but the joy of being in this community and spending time listening to music before you head out somewhere or afterwards is just a bigger part of it as the party itself. As sort of what we're going for here.
Quick question. This is a bit of a technical question, but that scene that you're showing right there, you were shooting on 500T or 500D film stock. Was there, and you said that you were dragging around a light mat with you. This scene here, and just thinking, in terms of exposure with nighttime practical lights, was what we're seeing here, and I'll just go back to this here. Is what we're seeing here all practical, or do you have some supplemental lighting happening here?
No, this is all practical. We had the overhead lights on for a little bit of this, but no, we had them off. So we had them off. Turns out we got like a little bit nervous when we had them off. When we got the scans back, the stuff we shot with them off actually looked great. And some of that ended up in the film. As a safety, we did turn an overhead light on. It's just like a bulb hanging above. Then we had this one on here. And then there's sort of a purple party light in the other room that you can, if I skim through the video at some point, I can show you, like, okay, in here that we had as well. But yeah, this was just practicals in here with the 500T. I should say that some of it was shot with 50D as well, which I had a roll in my fridge. So just people know, if they're curious about film, this was 50D. As you can see, it's like much cleaner, less grain, because lower ISO. But where were we?
And maybe actually we can take a moment now too, because we're just running a little short time, and I know there's a few other things that we want to talk about. I wanted to talk about the Audi stuff, because that's way on the other end of the production side, which I showed a bit of it at the top of the video. But I think we're going to skip that, folks. Go check out the audio or the Audi shot, the audio spot, Audi spot. Man, I can't even speak. It's a tongue twister. Audi.
It's an Audi sports spot. Matt Barkley, cinematographer, shot it. It's all about the anticipation before racing. Yeah.
But I want to talk about the Porsche one, because the Porsche one is kind of ties in, I think, a lot with the other two projects that we talked about in terms of aesthetically, maybe a little bit, but also just in terms of resources. And this is like a major car commercial, and I think it's a brilliant idea. So take us through this a little bit. I'm going to play this video here in a second for people.
Yeah, I think, okay, here we go, chat. So the Porsche one, just to clarify, it is a director's cut out of another commercial. But to talk about what I did for it was, I knew I had an opportunity to shoot these 4 little things for Porsche. And I kind of got obsessed with this idea of like capturing little vignettes, what I could on the day for sort of director's cuts. in a way, just because we had a good cast, this great car, some great locations. How could I get something a bit beyond this that, you know, I could express myself maybe a little differently in a creative way than I was doing with the actual commercial itself, which, you know, we're doing it for a client, we're doing it for an agency. I want to make sure they're happy with something. But was there an opportunity to get something out of it for myself? I mean, like that, like kind of creatively felt a bit more me. And so I talked with the agency and I was like, listen, we're going to be waiting for the sun to go down. Could we shoot this little thing? And, you know, a shot of it did end up in the original cut or whatever. But when I was scouting locations for this shoot, I was doing a lot of it on Google Street View. There wasn't a big budget. I don't have a car myself. We couldn't go driving around. And I found a location on Google Street View that, here we go. Do you know what? I got it up right here. Okay, cool. So, and I found this was this location, and there was this couple right here just pulled over at the side of the road, taking a photo. And I was thinking a lot about like what we were making. The whole slogan for Porsche at this time was "Decades of Dreamers." There's this other slogan called "Sports Car Together." And some other car stuff I'd done was all about the features in the car. How can you plug in your phone? Do you put your phone down on the dashboard and it charges it for you? It's like, where are all these thousands of cameras in the car? It's all very feature related. And I became interested in the idea of like doing something that celebrated maybe just the joy of driving, the joy of getting away, the joy of a moment to yourself, the joy of like maybe driving without a destination. And seeing this couple here like got me thinking about that. And I was like, oh, cool. Like, what I liked about this and what I was looking for was somewhere outside of the city that we were like north of it. You still got a sense of the city in the background. It's hard to see in this daylight shot here, but in the Porsche shot itself, you can see, I guess it would be Mississauga, edges of Toronto in the background, the lights of it. And I like this idea of starting on a scene with the car pulled over, a city in the background, the cell phone ringing on the dashboard, all the things you've sort of like left behind, and then turning away from that and finding the couple just there enjoying the sunset, which is something, I don't know, when's the last time I did that? Maybe never. You know what I mean? But it's like, I thought there was something a little aspirational about that to explore. And with this great location, with this fence or whatever, it just seemed like something I wanted to engage with. And the agency was cool with me shooting it, you know, because we were waiting for the sun to go down anyways, and we were going to use a shot in the actual proper spot itself. And so, yeah, the cinematographer on this is this amazing cinematographer, Chris Liu. I've worked with a number of times. He's so fantastic, and he did this whole move himself on a Dana Dolly, which is like a little slider on roller skates on like on a track. And so the idea was to start on the car and the phone in tight, pull out, kind of like as we moved right, everything else would fade away, and then you would just find them right there at the end of the spot. But yeah, it all was inspired by me finding this little photo on Google Street View.
And when it comes to commercial projects as well, how much are you thinking about how can I simplify this? Because the tendency for commercial work is to think, well, I've got all the money in the world, you know, so to speak. So like, what can I throw at this, right? But your stuff seems to be a little bit more intelligently thought out about just maximizing your resources of what you do have and letting that drive the creative. How much of that is actually happening on your commercial work?
Yeah, I mean, listen, the reality is that like I'm still like in a position where a lot of the commercial stuff I work on isn't the mega budget stuff. You know, I've had one or two opportunities to do that, which has been awesome. But a lot of stuff I do is still on a limited budget. So I'm still getting creative with what we have. And I think a lot of it goes back to what I was, you know, talking about in the very beginning is like casting. And you've got great people in front of the camera. You're finding great locations. You don't need a techno crane to pull off some like wild shot. You know what I mean? Like trying to like distill it in that and making sure you know, a real sense of like, I mean, listen, this is like getting a bit more like into the commercial technical side of things, but like, I always see like the script the agency has written and the client have like worked on together is like the story. And like my job is like to tell that story in the most compelling way possible while still honoring all the things that you need to do in the commercial in terms of the product and stuff like that. And so a lot of it is like, listen, I don't have massive budgets necessarily to do all these, you know, crazy visuals to pull it off, but like, what can we do with our casting, our characters, and like locations like this that can give you more production value. You know what I mean? And then finding ways of like, you know, that move. People have asked me, it's like, oh, did you guys have some, I don't know, probably these cranes that I have no idea really what they are. And I was like, no, it's just Chris and a Dana dolly pulling off the move like completely himself. And if you know, if you surround yourself with people that are just as passionate about pulling something like that off and don't demand thousands of toys, and don't feel like they need to, and know that, like, you know, we're playing when we do this and we're going to do the best thing that we can. You know, there's an opportunity to get these things.
We've got 2 questions from the chat, and then we're going to wrap it up with the thing that we want to talk about. One is from Kirill, and Kirill wants to know, like, we're seeing a lot of stuff shot next to windows. You must be an expert right now at shooting next to windows. Do you have any advice about shooting next to windows and the types of windows that you like?
I'd say it's like, you know, it's like if you're backlight, it's nice to form a silhouette with somebody. Make sure, I think compositionally, I like the idea of somebody being framed within a window itself. The idea is like there's, I don't know, it's like, it might sound a little corny, but there's always a bit of mystery of someone looking out the window itself. There's an implied thought of why they could be looking out the window. You lose yourself in it. I like just being lit from the window itself and nothing inside, and the softness from the skin. Shears are nice for people if you need to soften. It's really harsh daylight. Yeah, I mean, if the window looks great and the character looks great, you're probably set up for a great shot of somebody looking out the window. But I mean, you got to feel it out. I think, you know, if you can test it at home on your iPhone and with a friend of yours in front of the window and kind of feel things out and find what you like about shooting in front of a window. But there's no, I don't have a rule book for it necessarily. Or playbook,
I would just suggest people like watch all your films and screen grab every time someone's next to a window, and then that's your window book. You know, you want to know how to shoot next to a window? These are your reference stills.
Exactly.
We got one more question from Facundo Campos, and Facundo wants to know, he's trying to make the connection between your early work and your modern work, and at what point that work helped you manage to get repped. So at what point did your career progress to the point where you were able to get professional representation?
It was, I worked on a project called A Kid from Somewhere, which is a feature-length doc that was actually produced like with the creator class. And me and my buddy Adam did that together. And then after that, I just started, I mean, like at that point, I was doing a lot of doc stuff and like branded content stuff or whatever, like very, very freelance. And I hadn't actually I didn't think the commercial world was going to be the right place for me. And I was a little skeptical about it. But then I was like, oh, whatever, I'm just going to go around and start talking to people. And at that point, I knew a producer somewhere, and then another friend was rep somewhere. And so I just went down and started taking meetings. And at that point, I was getting feedback from people. I wouldn't say there was one project that like kicked my foot in the door and everybody was calling me. Like I had to go around and like interview with everybody. And then it was building up relationships with each one until the right project came along. Because you'll often, you know, be with a roster potentially in kind of a freelance basis, and then you'll get a script that you execute with them, and then they can elevate you onto the roster. It's like building underneath when you're sort of off roster at the top, and that's sort of the experience.
Awesome. Very cool. We want to wrap up the conversation today by talking about diversity, and like it goes without saying, people are watching 2 white guys with ball caps, glasses, talk about art.
And I'm extremely low.
And there's a lot been going on in the world recently around this. It's a long time coming, and Toronto, like many cities, we'd like to think we live in a very, very diverse city, which we do, but that diversity is not represented well within our filmmaking community. We still have predominantly Caucasian male creator class, effectively. And I know that you're doing something to help move the needle forward and move the industry in a better way. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing.
Yeah, so like I have like many qualms with many aspects of this industry, and especially just sort of the underrepresentation of Black people, all BIPOC, LGBTQ plus female directors. Like there's so many closed doors for even just, I mean, with some of the main privileges as I had kind of going into it, just because of the way I look or access to education that I have, it was hard enough to get in. I can't imagine what it is like for other people. And I think that that's the reason why you see and it is such an enclosed club in so many ways, and there's a lot of mystery behind what's going on between certain doors, and not a lot of outreach. And so for all those reasons and many more, I was just like, I've been wanting to sort of do something along these lines, because I never had something that was like a mentorship role or something that kind of like just took me along and was like, hey, this is the A to Z's of commercial directing, or this is like how you get into certain things or whatever. I never had anything like that. And many times I made mistakes because I had no idea. And I was kind of making up as I went along. And that's the basis for it. But what I want to do is I'm going to be starting a thing where I'm going to be reaching out to people, or people can please feel free to get in touch with me and to talk about this, but to create an experience where you can sit with me from sort of the pitch process through production, being in all the production meetings, being there with the agency, being there with client, through to the post process as well, to see how that all works. And so it's not just like an education through that. The other thing that I want to get is that you're then getting in a room with the producers that I'm working with. You're there on set with the film crew that I'm working with. You're getting, you'll form a relationship with that cinematographer as well. You'll meet his crew as well, that probably has people that are also aspiring filmmakers and just working in crews as well. Make those connections. And I think importantly, it's getting in rooms with agency producers, with creatives. So there's that familiarity. There's this horrible catch-22 in this industry, which has never made any sense for me, but it's like, I want to do a car spot. Well, how can you do a car spot? You don't have a car spot in your reel. Well, how am I ever supposed to do a car spot? That thinking, which is so backwards in so many ways, extends to so many other parts of the industry. And I want to create an opportunity where people can get through and get past those weird assumptions that people make, or awful assumptions, and kind of push back against the conservative, risk-averse attitudes by hopefully being able to vouch for the people I'm kind of bringing along, get them some familiarity, a face, to the name, to the work itself, and just kind of, it's not, obviously this isn't going to be a perfect system. There's going to be some kinks along the way. I want to do it in complete kind of collaboration with the people I'm trying to, assist through this. And knowing what they want out of it too, but that's sort of what I'm going to be doing.
That's awesome. Yeah. And I want to encourage everybody who's watching, if you are a filmmaker of any nationality, any race, any gender, that it's your responsibility, it's all of our responsibilities to lift up those who don't have those opportunities, and to mentor those, to create a more diversified world, to create a more diversified way of telling stories. When diversity enters into our story stream, we get so much more interesting and creative stuff. It's the same stuff that you enjoy as a resident of a city in a diverse city. You enjoy multiple foods, you enjoy multiple clothing styles, all this. You're going to enjoy a different way of telling stories if we boost up our diversity. And that, as they say, the rising tide lifts all boats, right? If you can bring everybody up, everyone else wins as a result. So, Paul, you are an incredible man, an incredible director.
Can I mention one more thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I mention one more thing? I know we're out of time, but I just want to give a shout out to the editors I work with, Lindsay Alicus. If you've watched The Lost Year, that's really her work. She's a storyteller just as much, and helps me craft all this crazy footage into an actual story and pushes me there. Incredible female editor. Look out for Lindsay Alicus. And then in a lot of the commercial work, it's a guy named John Gallagher who also puts up with me pacing around the room all day, looking over his shoulder. And my work is only as good as it is because
I think that's a great thing to mention, Paul, is that we're not singular artists, right? It's a collaborative art form, and there's some amazing people that, when you see the work, you don't always see those other people, but their hand is just as important. So thank you for that. And thank you for sharing your time. Thank you for sharing an hour of your time today. Really appreciate it. I know you're busy. So that was a great hour.
No problem. Yeah. Hope I wasn't rambling too much. I hope somebody got something out of this.
Oh, I did. That's all that matters. It's all about me.
Feel free to hit me. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Paul. Have a great afternoon and a great summer. And we'll hope to run into you soon. Cheers.